Hi guys, I'm Willem Kumalo from Pam Golding Properties. Welcome back to another podcast about real estate. This time I thought we would touch on the transfer and conveyancing process in general. I think as people in the industry, it's something that we do take for granted, but it's definitely not all common knowledge. And I think it serves everyone well, both from the purchasing and the selling perspective, to just know the process from start to finish and what to expect and timelines and that sort of thing. And to help us out with that, I've actually asked Kekeletso Makhetha from LNP Attorneys to help clarify some of that stuff and just kind of walk us through that process. Yeah, thanks for coming through, Kek.
Thank you, Willem.
If you would like, could you introduce sort of yourself and your firm and the kinds of things that you guys cover?
Okay. I'm Kekeletso Makhetha, and I'm a director at LNP Attorneys. And I'm an attorney, conveyancer, and a notary there. LNP Attorneys, it's a premium 100% Black-owned and 76% female-owned law firm. And we basically specialize in energy, natural resources, and infrastructure. And we're based in Bryanston.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so like I said, we are just going to chat about the transfer process quickly. Again, try and keep it short and concise, but informative. Whereas with the other podcasts, we had set questions. The transfer process is more of a fluid process, but we will still try to segment it where we can, just to help make it more understandable for people listening and watching. So basically the four main things that we're going to discuss is the people involved in the transfer process, the process itself and, everything that entails, and then maybe some discussion on the deeds office and its functions, and then some frequently asked questions, pretty much just troubleshooting some of the issues that clients come across from time to time. And as usual, I'll timestamp all of this in post-production so that if you need to skip ahead to a specific point, you are able to. So yeah, Keke, I think the first thing we'll discuss is who are the people involved in the transfer of a property.
Okay, thank you, Willem. The main people in the transfer would be the seller, the purchaser, the bond cancellation attorneys, the bond registration attorneys, and the municipality, and also SARS.
Okay. So then can we just differentiate for people who wouldn't know? So the seller and purchaser, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. Everyone understands who those people are, but then can we differentiate between the bond cancellation attorneys and the bond registration attorneys and their functions?
The bond cancellation attorneys are usually, once the seller is canceling his bond, the transferring attorney will inform the bank where the seller has his loan for his property, and the bank that is holding the loan will appoint a conveyancer, an attorney on their panel for them to cancel the existing bond. And then the bond registration attorneys is when the purchaser has applied for a bond, and then once the bond has been approved, the bank that is going to be registering the bond will appoint an attorney on their panel as well, so that they can register the bond on behalf of the purchaser. Okay. And then the municipality, I guess everybody knows, would be like COJ, and then the Tshwane municipality, depending on where the property is registered.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. So I think, that pretty much covers the parties involved within the transfer. So I think we can kind of get into the meat of it, which is the points going through the process itself.
Yeah, the transfer itself. Yeah. So once the seller has accepted an offer to purchase, and the buyer must also produce proof that he has got a bond the bond application has been successful. So the seller will then appoint the transferring attorney or a conveyancer, sometimes they call it a conveyancer, and to do the transfer. But it does not really have to be the seller. It has to be the seller, but the purchaser can also appoint a transferring attorneys, but then that has to be agreed upon by both parties, both the seller and the purchaser, and they would have to put that on the offer to purchase on who will appoint the transferring attorney. So once the transferring attorney has been appointed, he will be the one that will actually run the whole process of the transfer. And then they will contact the purchaser, they will contact the seller and request the FAQ documents from both the seller and the purchaser, and the bond information from the seller, so that they can inform the bank that they have the intention of canceling the bond. And then they will also request the lights and the rates and water and refuse removal statements, so that they can be able to request their clearance figures from the municipality, from the local authorities. And if it's a sectional title, they will ask for the levy figures from their body corporate or the homeowners authority. So this basically takes about 10 to 21 days. So depending on how backlogged the local authority is or the body corporate is. So the local authority will require us to give them copies of the buyer's and the seller's identity documents, and also the copy of the most recent rates and consumption accounts. Without this, it will take longer for them to provide us with the clearance figures. So we usually request that estate agents have all this information for us in the offer to purchase, so that we can make the process go much smoothly and effectively. So once we have all these documents, then we will start preparing the transfer documents, and we will also request the guarantees from the buyer's bond attorneys, which, as I said earlier on, will be appointed by the bonding bank, and will supply them with a draft deed of transfer so that they can start preparing the buyer's bond documents. Then the buyer and the seller will then sign the transfer documents. We would ask them to come to our offices, or we would go to them depending on how far they are and how busy they are. So the conveyancer will have to go and sign the buyer and the seller with so that they can sign all the transfer documents. And then they must, with them, the seller and the buyer, they have to have with them their original identity documents and their original municipal statements for FAQ purposes. And we would also request them to have their income tax number. Now, without these, then it becomes quite difficult for us to verify who they are and all that. And we have to also tell them that their income tax, their personal income taxes must be up to date. Because if they're not, then the South African Revenue Services will cancel the sale. So it is very important for them to be up to date. And then at the stage, then we will have the pro forma statement for the buyer, so that we tell them how much the transfer duty is and also the transfer attorney fees are. And as you know, for now, the transfer duty, we don't pay transfer duty for the first 1 million. So which is quite nice.
Yeah, yeah.
And on receipt, then so once we receive the guarantees from the bond attorneys, so as we said, the transfer attorneys, the bond attorneys, the cancellation attorneys, we all work together to make this process very efficient. So we will receive the guarantees from the bond attorneys, and then the transfer attorneys will then now forward the guarantees to the cancellation attorneys. at the bank that holds the seller's bond. Okay. Then the cancellation attorneys will then send their property original title deed to the transferring attorneys so that they can also start drafting the title deed, the new title deed. And then the seller's bank will prepare and sign the consent to cancellation documents, the cancellation documents. So then they start carrying on with their process of cancelling the bond. The bond attorneys will proceed with their bond documents and get their purchaser to come and sign their bond documents at their offices. Now this takes about 8 to 14 days. Okay.
Okay.
Then the transfer attorneys will then pay the transfer fees electronically, like if there's transfer duty, we'll then pay the transfer duty to SARS, and then we wait for a receipt. So SARS will give us a transfer duty receipt. So this takes about 40 to 35 days, but not really 35 days. This is the worst case scenario.
Okay.
And we'll then pay the rates and utility amounts to the local authorities and the body corporate or the homeowners authority. And we wait for the rates clearance certificate or the levy certificate from the body corporate. Now, once we have all that, then we start drawing up our new deed. Sometimes we call it a title deed. Okay. And then once we have all these documents, then we start arranging for lodgement. Also, sometimes we have to also collect the electrical compliance certificates from the seller, who is obliged to provide that to us so that we can now forward it to the purchaser after registration. Then all these attorneys, then we start arranging for lodgement. So we put everything in our documents, and then we start processing everything to the deeds office. Then that's when now everything goes to the deeds office. And then at the deeds office, it will take about 10 to 15 working days, provided that there are no errors and the paperwork does not have to be resubmitted back to the relevant attorney. So that's the process for the transfer.
Yeah.
So now let me go to the process once it gets to the deeds office. Okay. So then that's another process that goes through. So once it gets into the deeds office, your attorneys, either the bond attorneys, the transfer attorneys, will let you know that, okay, now we are lodging the documents. Now, lodgement means now it's now being taken through to the deeds office. Then the lodgement clerks, they are responsible for linking the transfer, the bond, and the cancellation, and the bond cancellation into one folder. After that batch has been linked and handed over for lodgement, the data clerk at the deeds office, they scan the deeds into the DOTS, which is the deeds office tracking system. So this is easier for them so that they can track through the movement of the transfer and the documents in the deeds office. Okay. Then the data clerk does a deed search on the seller, the purchaser, the property being transferred or bonded, and then they place those in a lodgement cover for the examiners to check. Okay. Then this batch is assigned to a level 1 examiner, which is usually a junior examiner. Then the deeds are examined by that examiner, who will raise notes or queries about the documents if there are any. And then from there, it will move to the assistant registrar, and then he monitors the rejected deeds or decides whether to pass or reject the deeds to the next step. Okay. If he is of the opinion that the notes on the deeds does not warrant a rejection, or that the examiner is in error in a particular respect, he would remove the notes and then pass the deed upon which such deeds go to be prepped, to go on prep. Okay, so this same applies if the examiner has made an error and passed the deed, okay, when it was not supposed to be passed. The assistant registrar would reject it there, and then the dispatch, and then he will dispatch for delivery back to the conveyancer. Okay.
Okay.
When the deed is rejected, which is what a conveyancer does not want to happen at all, it will be returned back to the attorney, and then we have to follow the whole process all over again. So you don't want any documents to be rejected at the deeds office.
Yeah.
Okay. Once the deeds have passed to the next step, that's when they are now on prep. Now your conveyancer should be able to then tell you that now the document is on prep. Okay, so once it's on prep, the deeds will be sent to prep and are ready for execution. Okay, the deeds may still have notes, but these will be minor queries which do not warrant for rejection to the entire batch.
Okay.
So then the deeds will sit at the on prep at the deeds office for about 5 days. Now this allows for minor notes to be dealt with by the conveyancer, and also for the conveyancer to finalize any outstanding matters to be with the banks or the purchasers, or any amounts that are still outstanding. This is the opportunity for them to now wrap up all their finances before it goes for execution, for registration. Okay. So now when all the conveyances linked to the batch are ready and the deeds are put forward, then they are put forward for registration. Okay. The deeds then are ready for registration and are received at execution the day after they are handed in from the prep stage. Okay. Then the deeds are executed, or they're registered in front of the registrar by the conveyancer, okay, and the registrar, who will also sign the deeds and affix and stamp on the office. Okay. Then that is when now the registration has happened. This is now when we say that the purchaser now is the owner of the property, and now it's no longer the seller's property. And the banks then will be informed on registration, and then they will have pay out the guarantees to the transferring attorneys and everybody else who had who requested guarantees from them. So that is when payment is done, and the banks will then pay out the guarantees to the transferring attorneys, who will then in return pay out to all the relevant parties, such as the estate agents and the sellers and everybody else. So that's basically the process that happens at the deeds office up until registration. So the transferring attorneys will then let everybody know, the seller, the purchaser, the estate agent, everybody, that the registration has happened. And then they should then provide a letter to the seller and the purchaser, so that they can now by themselves open and close their respective municipal accounts. Okay. So that's basically the whole process.
Yeah, in a nutshell, for sure. So what I'll do is I'll also, for those watching on YouTube, I will include the graphic that kind of simplifies that process and shows each person's function, just so that people can see, you know, a graphical representation of what this whole process is. So I think we have covered the first three, which is the people, the process, and the deeds. And yeah, I think we can kind of finish off with the frequently asked questions that you've had, and I've also had some from some of the clients when it comes to this transfer process. If you'd like to start, I don't know if you have anything in particular.
No, not really. I always believe that once you let your seller and your purchaser know the process from beginning to end, then they are quite comfortable with the whole process, and they will not be asking you every now and again when is registration happening. So they know exactly when you say the documents are on prep, they know what you're talking about. They know when you're saying that you're waiting for the bond cancellation attorneys, they know who those are. Because most people just believe once it's transferred, once they transferring a property, they believe that it's only one attorney that is dealing with the whole process, not knowing that it's you're dealing with a bond cancellation attorney, you're dealing with a bond registration attorney, you're dealing with municipality, you're dealing with SARS. So it's just basically putting everybody into one process.
Yeah.
So that is why it takes plus minus 3 months. But we at LNP, we try to do it as efficiently and in as little time as possible, because we know that when they want their registration to be done, it has to be done as quick as possible.
Yeah, true. So I'll start then with some of the stuff that I get from clients. So one of the questions that I get sort of early, sometimes even before the process, when people are, just trying to get their heads around, the whole process, is they ask, can you have the same conveyancing attorney and bond attorney? And if so, what are some of the benefits or pitfalls of having that sort of arrangement?
You can have, but if the transferring attorney is on the bank that, if it's on the bank panel that is going to be providing you with a loan, but it's not the conveyancer that determines whether they want to do the bond or not. The bank appoints the attorney. Now we can, if we are on the bank panel, we can go to the bank and say, we are doing the transfer. Please, can you just let us also do the bond as well? Yeah. It is easier to do it that way, because then now all the documents are signed at one office, and then we can be able to also work on a discount for you. Because now because everything is paid by the purchaser. So now we are able to give the purchaser a discount and saying, okay, because we are doing the transfer for you and the bond for you, can we just work on one nice amount for you? Yeah. So it is possible, but it's we are not appointed for the bond attorneys. We don't appoint ourselves. The bank appoints the attorney that they would like for them to do their registration of the bond. Yeah.
Okay. And then another question that I do get every now and then, in the case of say distress sales, or where someone is selling just because of an issue of financial pressure, in an instance where maybe the rates are a little bit behind or the levies are a little bit behind, is someone still able to sell their property, and what are the the measures they can take to account for those shortfalls that they might have?
Okay. Unfortunately, once your municipal account is behind, the local authority will not provide us with the race clearance certificate, so it has to be paid up in full. Now we are able to talk to, if the seller is willing to, and saying, okay, we will be paying for you that amount of money that you're owing, but then we take it out of your sale, of your purchase price. Yeah. So then, so that it makes the whole process move forward, because we cannot get the rates clearance figures if it is behind. And you must also remember that once they calculate the rates, they calculate it in 3 months in advance. Yeah. So it's not exactly how much you are owing at that time. It's that amount of money, and then they do an estimate of how much it will be for the next month and the following month and the following month. So it's 3 months. So, but then you do, if we do register in 2 months, then you do get a refund from your local authority. But unfortunately, we cannot register with that outstanding. That has to be paid.
Okay, perfect. And yeah, I think from what people will be able to see and what they've heard is that a lot of it is out of the control of the purchaser and the seller after a certain point. But then I would say, if we were maybe to summarize in terms of what their responsibilities are in terms of documentation for like your purchases, other than your FICA and the offer to purchase itself, is there anything else people need to be aware of? And obviously the costs that they'll be paying in terms of the duties and transfer costs and all of that.
Yeah. So the purchaser will have to have your FICA, okay, and as I said earlier on, also your income tax numbers have to be in order, and from the seller also your bond account numbers will have to provide us with that. Also, we have to also know how your marital status, because sometimes I've met a lot of people who are not, they would come and say, I'm just married. So we have to know whether you are married in community or property, you're married out of community or property, and then if you are married in community or property, your spouse has to come and sign the documents with you, and it's just not you alone wanting to sell the property. So we have to know who your marital status is. So because sometimes you find that a person has, on the title deed, it is just mentioning him or her. And then 5 months down the line or a year down the line, they got married in community or property. So we need to find out all those factors so that we know that now you are married in community or property, even if it does not state it on the transfer, on the title deed, but it is an important thing for us to know.
Okay.
So that's about it.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. Perfect. So yeah, I think for the most part we've covered the gist of the whole process and what's required and all of that. So yeah, I think if any people have any questions, you can comment on this, or you can email or call me. All my details are listed below. And yeah, thank you, Keke, for coming through and giving us this information.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, and guys, any further questions, please let me know. And maybe we'll do an update episode with Keke if there's any pertinent issues that people want to know about.
That'll be perfect.
Cool. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Willem.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.